A dream honeymoon in paradise became the setting for a horrifying nightmare. Emily Parker, a compassionate nurse celebrated for her dedication to saving lives, committed an act so brutal it stunned the world. In the midst of a luxury escape with her husband, Jason Bennett, she discovered a secret he had kept hidden for years, one that shattered her trust and ignited a deadly confrontation. By the time the sun rose over the serene waters of the Maldives, their perfect love story had unraveled into an unthinkable tragedy. How does a relationship full of promise spiral into such violence? What happens when the truths we fear most come crashing into the lives we've carefully built? Before we dive into the chilling details of this shocking case, be sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Files, HQ, your source for gripping stories of betrayal, secrets, and devastation. Emily Parker, 29, was a devoted ER nurse based in Houston, Texas. Her colleagues admired her for her empathetic nature, always going above and beyond to help those in need. A woman of deep faith, Emily dreamed of a life filled with love, happiness, and family. She longed for a fairy tale romance, the kind of love story that would last forever. Emily had built her life around the idea of finding her perfect match and living a life that reflected her traditional values. Jason Bennett, 31, was a quiet yet charismatic software engineer. His calm and thoughtful demeanor made him stand out among his peers. Although he didn't seek attention, Jason's intelligence and charm were magnetic. A tech-savvy man with an eye for detail, he often captivated others with his kindness and quiet confidence. Jason's reserved nature hid a world of depth, and he found solace in his relationship with Emily, feeling understood for the first time. Their paths crossed in 2021 at a charity gala hosted in Houston, where Emily was volunteering. The two hit it off instantly, finding a rare connection in the midst of the event's busy atmosphere. What began as a casual conversation quickly blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Jason showered Emily with extravagant surprises, romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and thoughtful gestures that made her feel like the most important person in his world. Emily, in turn, couldn't resist sharing their growing love with her large social media following. Her posts painted the picture of a perfect relationship, with captions like, "Feeling blessed to have found my soulmate," and "Our love is a fairy tale come true." By early 2022, Jason and Emily were inseparable. Jason had already made plans for their wedding, and Emily was overjoyed. They chose Napa Valley as the location for their ceremony, a picturesque, intimate affair that would become the talk of their friends and family. The wedding, held in the spring of 2022, was everything Emily had dreamed of. Surrounded by loved ones, they exchanged vows in a beautiful vineyard, with a promise of forever hanging in the air. To everyone watching, Emily and Jason were the perfect couple. Their fairy tale love story was celebrated both online and in person, setting the stage for what seemed like a flawless future together. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, Jason carried a secret that would soon unravel everything they had built. The honeymoon setting was everything Emily had dreamed of and more. Their luxurious overwater villa in the Maldives was perched above crystal-clear turquoise waters, the kind of paradise that looked too perfect to be real. Each morning, they woke up to the soft sound of waves lapping against the villa's stilts, the sun rising over an endless horizon. The villa, complete with private balconies, an infinity pool, and panoramic views of the ocean, seemed designed for romance. Emily shared the breathtaking beauty with her followers on social media, posting pictures with captions like, "Living our best life," and "Honeymoon bliss," each post showcasing the happiness she felt in that moment. But beneath the polished surface of their perfect getaway, Emily would soon uncover a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her new husband. Emily had noticed something off during their first intimate moment in the villa. Jason, typically so gentle and affectionate, seemed distant and uneasy. His usual ease and confidence were replaced by a subtle tension. He avoided eye contact more than usual, and when their closeness should have deepened their connection, there was an undeniable barrier between them. His touch, though tender, lacked the warmth she had come to expect. At one point, as he gently kissed her neck, she felt him pull away slightly, almost as if he were holding something back. That night, as they lay in bed, she sensed the unease in him, an unspoken discomfort that she couldn't quite place. She had no idea what could be causing it, but it weighed on her mind. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was as though Jason was keeping part of himself hidden, even in their most intimate moments. It happened on the second day of their honeymoon, while they were unpacking their things in the spacious bedroom. Jason had excused himself to step out on the balcony for a moment, leaving Emily alone in their private sanctuary. As she organized their luggage, she noticed something out of place, a small, unmarked bottle tucked at the back of Jason's bag. Curiosity piqued, she opened it, and the label read, "Hormone Therapy." Confused, she turned the bottle over in her hand, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what she was looking at, but she knew it wasn't something she recognized. As she continued to unpack, her eyes landed on a set of scars along Jason's torso, faint but visible when he removed his shirt after a swim. They were surgical scars, the kind one might have after gender-affirming surgery. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She felt the ground beneath her feet shift, as though the very foundation of their relationship was cracking. Jason returned moments later, his smile faltering when he saw the bottle in Emily's hand. Before he could speak, Emily's voice cracked, her words trembling with a mix of confusion and rising fear. "What is this, Jason?" she demanded, her gaze hardening. Jason's face paled, his hands trembling as he hesitated. The joy they'd shared moments ago seemed to have evaporated, leaving a cold, suffocating silence in its wake. He knew this moment was inevitable, but he had hoped it wouldn't come so soon. He had feared this moment from the very beginning. I need to explain," Jason said, his voice quiet but earnest. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes at first, then slowly began to speak, each word carefully chosen. "Emily, I wasn't always this." His voice faltered, the weight of the secret he had carried for so long evident in his expression. "I was born biologically female. I transitioned a decade ago. The medication, it's part of my ongoing hormone therapy. The scars, they're from my surgery." Emily stood frozen, her heart racing, her breath shallow. The words felt like a punch to her gut, stealing the air from her lungs. She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, her mind spinning with shock, confusion, and betrayal. "You, what?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, but the tremor in her tone betrayed her emotions. "You were a woman. All this time, you've been hiding this from me." Jason's face tightened, his eyes filled with guilt. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emily. I was terrified you'd reject me. I thought if we were really in love, we'd find a way to work through it. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you, but I was too afraid. Too afraid of losing you." Emily took a step back, her mind struggling to catch up with the revelation. Her emotions were a chaotic storm, colliding with her deeply held beliefs. As a woman who had grown up in a devout religious household, she had always viewed the world through a lens of traditional values. The very idea of gender transition had always been something foreign, even controversial, to her. Now, in the face of the man she had married, it felt like a betrayal she couldn't fully process. Her breath quickened, her hands shaking as she struggled to hold back tears. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" The words spilled from her in a rush, the anger in her voice rising as the gravity of the situation settled in. "All this time, you've been lying to me, Jason. Lying about who you really are." Jason's eyes brimmed with regret, but there was no turning back now. "I never wanted to lie to you, Emily. But I feared you wouldn't accept me. I wanted us to have a future together, and I thought this, my past, would destroy that." Emily's mind swirled, her feelings torn between love for her husband and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that now consumed her. The shock was too much to bear, and the storm inside her heart raged uncontrollably. As the realization of what she had just learned settled into her bones, Emily's faith and her beliefs collided with the love she had for Jason, leaving her at a crossroads she never could have imagined. The paradise they had found on their honeymoon was quickly slipping away, and Emily felt herself sinking into an abyss she couldn't escape. The tension between Emily and Jason that had been building for days reached a boiling point late that night. The moonlight streamed in through the villa's large windows, casting an eerie glow across the room, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with anger and betrayal. Emily stood at the foot of their bed, her face flushed with fury, her voice shaking with the weight of her emotions. Jason sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, his body trembling as he pleaded with her. "You lied to me!" Emily shouted, her voice rising. "You've been hiding this from me, this whole time. You've been lying about who you really are." Jason's eyes were filled with pain and regret. He stood up slowly, his hands outstretched, as though trying to bridge the gap between them. "Emily, please, I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice cracked. "I never meant to deceive you. I thought." "You thought?" Emily interrupted, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You thought I would just accept this? You thought I could live with the fact that you've been living a lie for all these years? How could you think that?" Tears welled up in her eyes, a mix of sadness, anger, and heartbreak. She wanted to understand, she wanted to forgive, but the shock of his revelation, the overwhelming sense of betrayal, and the conflict with her beliefs clouded her every thought. "You never trusted me enough to tell me the truth," she continued, her voice trembling with rage. "All this time, I thought we had something real, something pure. And you were keeping this from me. How am I supposed to deal with this, Jason? How?" Jason stepped toward her, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Please, I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I thought if we could get away, I could finally tell you everything." But Emily was beyond reasoning. The storm of emotions inside her exploded, and in a fit of rage, she snapped. Her heart pounded in her chest, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she stormed past him, her mind spiraling out of control. She needed to do something, anything, to rid herself of the suffocating weight of betrayal. Without thinking, she rushed into the villa's kitchen, her breath coming in short gasps. Her mind was a whirlpool of confusion, hurt, and anger. She needed to end it, end the overwhelming feelings of deception, the suffocating guilt that clawed at her from within. She grabbed the first thing she could find, a sharp kitchen knife. The cold metal felt foreign in her hand, but the fury that surged through her veins made her actions seem almost instinctual. She didn't know what she was doing, only that the pain inside her had to be stopped. She turned, the knife clenched tightly in her hand, her heart racing with a mix of fear and fury. Jason looked up, his face pale as he saw the weapon in her hand. His voice shook as he tried to reason with her again. "Emily, please, put the knife down. We can figure this out. Just calm down." But his words fell on deaf ears. In that moment, all Emily could see was the man who had betrayed her, the man who had destroyed the perfect life she thought they had. In a wild, frantic motion, she lunged forward. The blade sank into Jason's side, and he cried out in shock and pain. He staggered backward, his hands instinctively going to the wound, but Emily was relentless. She swung again, and again, each strike fueled by her anger and the overwhelming flood of emotions that consumed her. The knife glinted in the dim light of the room, each stab landing with horrifying force. Jason's attempts to defend himself were feeble as the blood began to pool around them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. When it was over, Jason's body lay motionless on the floor, the room eerily silent except for Emily's ragged breathing. Her hands were slick with blood, her mind reeling as she stood over him. In that moment, she realized the enormity of what she had done, but there was no turning back. Her vision blurred, and panic set in. The villa's luxurious bathroom became the setting for the next grisly chapter. Emily, now consumed by a cold, detached sense of purpose, dragged Jason's body to the bathroom. The space, once a place of relaxation and serenity, now felt suffocating. She moved quickly, her actions robotic, as she began to dismember his body. The sound of the knife slicing through flesh was sickening, but she was beyond rational thought. She hacked at his limbs, the grotesque reality of her actions unfolding before her eyes. It was a macabre, mechanical process, one that was more about survival than remorse. She stuffed the dismembered pieces into black garbage bags, her mind focused only on the task at hand, the need to conceal the crime she had just committed. With her heart pounding in her chest, she staggered to the balcony, where the ocean was calm and dark, its waves crashing gently against the shore. She dragged the heavy bags, one by one, to the edge of the villa. The weight of each bag was a reminder of the horrifying deed she had just carried out, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was getting rid of the evidence. Under the cover of darkness, she tossed the bags into the sea, watching as they disappeared into the depths of the ocean. The waves swallowed them whole, leaving no trace of the man she had once loved. As the last bag was consumed by the water, Emily stood in silence, her body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline. The nightmare she had created was just beginning, but for now, all she could do was wait. The morning after the grisly events, the sun rose over the pristine Maldives, casting a golden hue across the calm sea. But inside the villa, Emily was anything but calm. She moved through the space with a strange sense of urgency, her face pale, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She claimed Jason had gone for an early morning swim and never returned. At first, the story seemed plausible. After all, the resort was located in a secluded area, and it wasn't uncommon for guests to take early swims in the tranquil waters. But Emily's erratic behavior soon raised suspicion. As she spoke to resort staff, her words seemed rehearsed, yet her actions contradicted them. She fidgeted, her hands trembling, and when asked about Jason's disappearance, her answers were vague and inconsistent. The staff noticed how her demeanor shifted, from frantic worry to defensive coldness, and something about her behavior didn't add up. One of the staff members, who had noticed Emily standing near the villa's balcony late the previous night, mentioned the odd sight of her dragging heavy garbage bags across the villa's pristine grounds. Alarm bells began to ring. As the staff alerted local authorities, Emily was escorted to the resort's small office, where she waited anxiously, her mind racing. She tried to remain calm, but every passing minute felt like an eternity. In the meantime, the police had already begun their investigation. The moment they entered the villa, they noticed the bloodstains in the bathroom, dark splotches scattered across the floor and splattered on the walls. The sight sent a chill down their spines. They followed the blood trail to the kitchen, where more dark stains marked the countertops and floor. But what shocked them even more was the pristine silence of the room. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of a fight. The air was eerily still, as though something had been wiped clean, carefully erased. In the closet, behind neatly stacked towels and toiletries, they found the handsaw, its blade covered in dried blood. The horror of what had occurred in that villa began to set in as they pieced the evidence together. This was no simple accident, it was a carefully executed crime. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the office, growing increasingly nervous as time passed. Her alibi was unraveling. She had been seen alone in the villa the previous evening, and no one had seen Jason since then. She kept repeating her story, but the officers could see through the facade. As the search continued, Emily's anxiety turned to panic, her hands shaking as she clasped them together, desperate for any distraction from the unraveling truth. 2 days later, local fishermen were out on their morning routine, scanning the shoreline for their usual catch. As they cast their nets into the water, one of them noticed something strange floating in the distance, dark, bloated objects that didn't seem like debris. They moved closer, and as they pulled the objects to shore, their stomachs churned at the gruesome discovery. Body parts, disfigured, mutilated, and unmistakable, washed up on the beach. The pieces were scattered across the sand, each one more horrifying than the last. The fishermen quickly contacted the authorities, who arrived on the scene within minutes. The beach was cordoned off, and investigators began the grim task of identifying the remains. The pieces of flesh and bone were carefully collected, but the sight was so gruesome that even the most seasoned officers were shaken. There was no mistaking it, the remains belonged to Jason Bennett. The surgical precision of the dismemberment was evident, and the investigators knew they had uncovered a heinous crime. Emily's story was beginning to fall apart completely. With the evidence mounting against her and the grisly remains discovered in the waters, there was no escaping the chilling reality of what had happened in that villa. The investigation had only just begun, but it was clear that the truth was out, and Emily Parker's carefully constructed life was unraveling faster than she could comprehend. The news of Jason Bennett's brutal murder and dismemberment in the Maldives spread like wildfire across the globe. Headlines screamed across newspapers, online articles, and news channels: honeymoon horror, newlywed nurse murders husband in Maldives paradise, and luxury turns deadly, bride kills husband after discovering trans identity. The case became a media sensation, captivating audiences worldwide and stirring up intense debate. In every corner of the internet, people began weighing in, some offering sympathy, while others poured out condemnation. On social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, the hashtag #JasonBennett became a trending topic. Videos, posts, and discussions about the tragic case flooded every feed, with each new opinion adding fuel to the fire. Emily's supporters rallied behind her, claiming that her actions were driven by the pain of betrayal. They argued that discovering her husband's transgender identity after their wedding, especially in such a vulnerable moment as their honeymoon, was a crushing blow. She was lied to. She deserves answers, some of her followers said, using her background as a devoted nurse and religious woman to validate her reaction. They painted her as a victim of deception, someone who had been denied the truth when she needed it most. Her supporters expressed disbelief that Jason had hidden such an important part of himself from her, and they lamented that Emily's emotional turmoil had ultimately led to this horrific tragedy. However, Emily's critics saw the situation differently. They condemned her for the violence and for allowing her personal beliefs to override any possibility of understanding or compassion. Some even accused her of committing a hate-fueled crime, using her religious convictions as an excuse to justify her brutal actions. The media quickly labeled the murder as transphobic in nature, casting a dark shadow over the case. They questioned whether Emily's extreme reaction stemmed from fear and prejudice or if it was a result of deeper, unresolved issues with gender identity. Online forums were flooded with harsh comments, some calling for justice and others calling for her to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But amidst the accusations and outrage, many people began to focus on the broader issue at hand, the challenges faced by transgender individuals in romantic relationships. They pointed to the immense pressure that Jason, and others like him, must have faced in concealing their identity out of fear of rejection and ridicule. Experts and advocates for transgender rights started weighing in, discussing the complexities of navigating love, intimacy, and identity in a society that often stigmatizes gender nonconformity. They asked the question, how can someone ever truly be free to love when society demands such rigid standards for identity and relationship dynamics? As the story went viral, public opinion split into two polarizing camps. One that sympathized with Emily, focusing on her emotional distress and the sense of betrayal she must have felt, and the other that viewed her actions as a tragic reflection of deep-rooted societal intolerance. Blogs, videos, and opinion pieces flooded the web, dissecting every detail of the case, from the timeline of their relationship to the revelation of Jason's past. Some argued that Emily's violent outburst wasn't just a response to Jason's secret but also to the overwhelming pressures and expectations placed on her by society as a devout woman who valued traditional norms. Others called it an egregious overreaction fueled by narrow-mindedness and fear. Despite the emotional debates and division, one thing was clear: the case had ignited a firestorm of conversation about gender, identity, and the limits of trust in relationships. Social media users began sharing their personal stories of similar betrayals, while others expressed their fears of being judged or misunderstood in their own relationships. Online activists and LGBTQ+ groups worked tirelessly to spread awareness about the complexities of gender identity, calling for more empathy and understanding, and urging a more compassionate approach toward transgender people and their experiences. In the midst of the media frenzy, Emily's own social media accounts were flooded with messages, many of them condemning her actions, while others offered support. Her carefully curated online image as a loving wife and devoted nurse had crumbled into something unrecognizable. The pressure of being thrust into the public eye as the face of such a tragic crime took its toll on her. She became a symbol of both anger and empathy, a reminder of the consequences of hiding one's truth and the dangers of failing to communicate in relationships. As the days went by, the media didn't let up. Every detail of the investigation was broadcasted, and soon, rumors of Emily's mental state, her upbringing, and her relationship with Jason began to surface. Some media outlets painted her as a broken woman who had suffered under the weight of expectations, while others portrayed her as a cold, calculating criminal who was driven by a need to control the narrative. The case had become more than just about one tragic death. It was now a lens through which people examined the intersection of gender identity, love, societal norms, and the consequences of keeping secrets. In homes across the world, families debated what they would do in Emily's position, discussing what it meant to be truly honest in a relationship and how societal pressures could warp even the most loving unions. The public's reaction was a reflection of the deep, sometimes uncomfortable conversations about gender, identity, and acceptance that the world was just beginning to grapple with. And as the story unfolded, it became clear that this case would not just be remembered for its horrific violence, but for the way it forced society to confront its biases and the struggles of those who lived on the margins of conventional expectations. The courtroom was filled with tension as the trial of Emily Parker began. The air felt heavy with anticipation, with reporters, family members, and legal experts all gathered to witness the proceedings. Emily sat in the defendant's chair, her face a mask of emotion, part sorrow, part defiance. Her once polished, flawless image had been shattered, replaced by a woman facing the consequences of a brutal crime that had shocked the world. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but insisted that her actions were not premeditated. It was a crime of passion, she told the court, her voice shaky yet firm. I didn't plan to kill Jason. I was devastated, confused, and scared. I didn't know how to react when I found out the truth. Her words seemed to echo in the quiet courtroom, evoking mixed reactions from the public and the jury. Some in the audience nodded in agreement, while others whispered in disbelief at her attempt to justify the violent outburst that had claimed her husband's life. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They argued that the gruesome nature of Jason's murder, stabbing him multiple times before dismembering his body in cold blood, showed that it was not a momentary act of passion, but one that was carefully thought out in a fit of rage and hatred. The murder was too calculated, too violent, to be dismissed as a crime of passion. They reminded the jury of the black garbage bags and the manner in which Emily had disposed of Jason's remains in the dark of night, trying to cover up her crime with methodical precision. Witnesses who knew Emily and Jason personally took the stand. Friends and family painted a picture of Jason as a man terrified of rejection. His deep fear of his secret being discovered had weighed heavily on him throughout their relationship. Emily, on the other hand, was described as a woman with deeply ingrained traditional views, whose strong religious convictions had often dictated her actions. One of her close friends testified that Emily had openly talked about her ideal, traditional marriage and how she dreamed of having a family built on religious values. This was something Emily had shared widely on social media and with those close to her. Experts in psychology and gender studies testified about the complex pressures involved in keeping a life-changing secret, like Jason's transition, from a partner. They discussed the deep emotional turmoil Jason must have endured, living in fear of being rejected for his true identity. The expert testimony painted a heartbreaking picture of a man who had tried to live authentically but had been consumed by fear of how his truth would be received by someone he loved. The experts also spoke on the dangers of hiding one's identity in a relationship, how it could cause internalized shame and confusion, and how the pressure could lead to destructive consequences, like the one witnessed in this case. Despite the evidence that seemed to point to Emily's profound emotional distress and shock, the brutality of her actions weighed heavily on the jury. They deliberated for hours, grappling with the complexity of the case. Was Emily's violence a result of overwhelming emotional pain, or was it an unforgivable overreaction born of intolerance and fear? In the end, the jury found her guilty of first-degree manslaughter, rejecting her defense of a crime of passion. The evidence of premeditation, such as her carefully concealing the crime, was too compelling to ignore. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Emily's face fell, her eyes welling up with tears, and her shoulders shook as the weight of her conviction sank in. She had hoped for a lesser sentence, one that could offer her a second chance at redemption. But instead, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that reflected the severity of her crime and the shock it had sent through the public. As the courtroom emptied, whispers filled the air, and a sense of finality took hold. For some, Emily's conviction was a bitter reminder of the emotional and psychological toll that fear, ignorance, and societal pressure could have on a person. For others, it was a warning that there was no excuse for such brutal violence, no matter the circumstances. Outside the courtroom, the fallout from the trial continued to reverberate. The media coverage intensified as the case became a landmark in the discussion of gender identity, the challenges transgender individuals face in relationships, and the deadly consequences of secrets left unspoken. Was it the weight of Jason's hidden truth that pushed Emily over the edge? Or was it the inability to accept and understand a partner's past that led to such a deadly outburst? These are the questions that will continue to haunt everyone involved in this case. Do you think Jason should have told Emily the truth earlier? How can we create a world where honesty and acceptance can coexist without fear of judgment? If this story left you speechless, hit like and subscribe to True Crime Files, HQ for more real-life cases that delve into the darkest corners of human nature.